Dr. McGee and Ms. Mason. This is Team Bank of America, and this is our Singapore presentation. First, to start, in Singapore, it's called Bank of America Singapore Limited, and it's a part of the Asia Pacific for Bank of America, which currently operates in 19 cities and has 12 different markets. And Bank of America Singapore Limited is the branch within Singapore. Currently, there are two different branches. One is the Bank of America branch, and then the other is Merrill Lynch. And it was founded in 1993, and it used to be called Bank America International Financial Corporation. And currently, it has about 250 to 499 employees. And during this presentation, you'll be able to learn a bit more about how Bank of America operates in Singapore. Structure. A lot of Bank of America Singapore operates under the same leadership team that Bank of America holds firm-wide. So Brian Moynihan is the CEO, Catherine Besant is the Chief Technology and Operations Officer, and she previously held the Global Technology and Operations role across the company for all employees. Then Ms. Sherry Bronstein is the Global Human Resources Executive, and she manages employee relationships for all of Bank of America's operations across the globe. So that's including in Singapore. And then lastly, Jeffrey Greener is the Chief Risk Officer for Bank of America. So he develops and implements risk management for all of Bank of America locations across the globe. So that's the specific executive leadership team that operates for the entire Bank of America. However, in Singapore, we only could find a few executives. So the deputy chief executive of Bank of America Singapore is Alan Koh, and he's a part of the Audit and Risk Committee additionally. And he previously served as vice chairman and general manager of Bank of America, NT, and in the Singapore branch. And then lastly, some of the board of director members who also serve as directors at the Bank of America Singapore Limited are Yu and Rush Kumar.
So America and Singapore have very different economic structures. I say this because the United States is a much bigger company than Singapore. So the United States has a population of about 325 million people. The annual GDP is $19.5 trillion. The GDP per capita is $45,000 about. The real GDP growth is about 2.6%, and the national debt is 22.1 trillion. Singapore has a population of 5.6 million people. The annual GDP is $323 billion, and the GDP per capita is about $57.5 thousand. And also the real GDP growth is 3.6%, and they have a national debt of about $541 billion. So all of this means is that even though the United States is a much bigger a much bigger country, Singapore is a much healthier country in terms of economic growth, because their economic growth is much higher. Their GDP per capita is much higher, which means their citizens have typically a better life rate.
So we just wanted to give you a visual of what Brianna stated earlier in terms of Bank of America's Asian Pacific operations. Like she said, there's 19 cities and 12 markets. In Singapore, Bank of America Singapore and Limited, the offices are much smaller than what they would be typically in a United States office. Bank of America Singapore Limited was specifically founded in 1993 as a subsidiary division of Bank of America, and some of the services they offer are very similar to the ones that they do offer here in the United States, such as foreign exchange solutions. In terms of business etiquette, Singaporean cultures do have some similarities that we share here in America. Like the business hours in Singapore typically are 8:30 to 5:30. Even though the standard here in America is usually 9 to 5, so that's pretty much on track with each other. However, one thing that I did notice that was different is that in Singapore, upon arrival, you do shake hands with the individuals that you meet, all of the individuals, not just anyone specifically, and you do the same upon departure, when you leave, it's just a sign of respect, and, to thank everyone for their time. Another difference that I did find very interesting is that in Singapore, they really do focus when networking on those personal connections. It's not really all talk, all business all the time. People take that very personally, and it can be offensive if you do go about it the wrong way, which I know here in America we like to kind of cut to the chase sometimes. So we do want to be very conscious with that when conducting business in Singapore.
Okay, so unlike Singapore, the United States is a free market economy, meaning it's the law of supply and demand, so and a laissez-faire economy. So the U.S. stock market is also currently valued at $34 trillion compared to the rest of the world, which is $44 trillion in capitalization. The U.S. stock market is estimated to have an average of annualized return of negative 1.5% and includes the returns from the dividends currently yielding at 1.87%. So this means that there is no returns in the United States, meaning they're getting no money back because they borrowed so much. In Singapore is a mixed economy, which means that the government puts more regulations on like what companies can do, so they don't have as much power as say in America. So that means companies can't just take free range of like all assets like oil or natural resources and things like that. The stock market of Singapore is expected to return 16.4%. This is from the contribution of economic growth and local current prices at 3.99%. And a dividend yield of 4.44%, which means they are going to have a return, which is why, which is why, like Naja said, Singapore has a much more healthier economy. In Singapore, the finance minister, Heng Swee Keat, announced that the goods and services tax import relief will be tightened. And alcohol duty-free concession will also be reduced. So that means like the things that you can take in and out of Singapore, like alcohol, goods, and things like that, is going to be a higher tax. So it's going to be a lot more difficult. As well as Singapore's services sector, competitive companies will have to rely even less on foreign workers. So which means like you basically kind of like in America, you can't just charge foreign workers less than what they deserve. Also, and as well as in Singapore, there is the schools. They divide the students up to how good they are. So like in America, they have a gifted class. So they do the same thing in Singapore. So sorting students by their ability has led to better educational outcomes in Singapore, but it also has affected themselves. So people in in a lower class might have self-esteem issues, but rather than people in a higher class, and it might lead to tension. So that also has been big in the news lately, and as well as the fact that Singapore has a new budget plan. So there's a lot of winners and losers in the economy.
Additional questions that we came up with, we wanted to note that throughout our research, we weren't able to solidify how Singapore's government relations align with Bank of America. So we really wanted to plan on trying to conduct more research before we got to Singapore. And then as well, while we're over there, we want to reach out to their team and their executives to find out what their direct relationship with the government is. But as you can see on the PowerPoint in our paper, we also have a list of some of the questions we want to ask them, which include noting how the Global Ambassadors Forum that they hosted back in 2013 impacted their firm, how frequently does the Singapore office interact with some of the other Asia Pacific locations that Bank of America has, and then how Bank of America Singapore Limited's public relations status is in Singapore. So we wanted to thank you for listening, and we hope that we prepared the honor students for how they should conduct themselves when visiting Bank of America Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you.